It's strange, the way some people walk into your life and quietly rearrange everything you thought you knew about love. Ethan wasn't supposed to be that person. I met him on a random Thursday afternoon at a little coffee shop tucked between a bookstore and a florist. I was working, editing photos from a wedding shoot, when he came in carrying a small potted plant that looked like it had seen better days. He apologized to the barista for almost knocking over a chair, and when he looked up, our eyes met. He smiled, that kind of uncertain, apologetic smile that somehow made the air feel softer. "Rough day?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just trying to keep something alive." He nodded to the plant and I laughed. "Good luck with that." He came back the next day. Then again the day after that. First I thought it was coincidence. But then he admitted, "I was hoping you'd be here again." There was something in his voice. Honest, unpolished, real. We started talking. About everything. About nothing. He told me he worked as a paramedic, how sometimes he went home with the sound of sirens still ringing in his ears. I told him I took pictures to freeze emotions before they disappeared. We'd stay for hours trading stories, letting the world blur around us. One night, we drove to the old lookout past the city limits. It was cold enough to see our breath, but neither of us wanted to go home. He looked at me and said quietly, "You ever feel like you've been waiting for someone without knowing it?" I didn't answer, I just looked at him and it was enough. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from my face and kissed me. It wasn't fireworks or movie magic. It was slower, deeper, like recognition. I felt something settle inside me, something that whispered, "This is what safe feels like." From that night on we were us. Two souls moving in rhythm, laughing, exploring, building small traditions. Midnight pancakes, Sunday drives, handwritten notes tucked into each other's jackets. He became home in a world that always felt temporary. I remember taking a photo of him once, sitting by the window, sunlight pouring over his face. He looked up and said, "You always make it look like I'm worth remembering." And I said, "You are." I didn't know then how fragile time really was, how love, no matter how strong, could be borrowed. But in that moment nothing felt borrowed. Felt like forever. That was when we fell. And I swear, I've never landed quite the same since. It started slowly, like the sun dimming a little earlier each evening. At first it was just exhaustion, or that's what I told myself. Too many late nights, too many projects, too many cups of coffee that only made my hands shake harder. Ethan would tease me for forgetting where I left my keys, or misplacing my camera lens, and we'd laugh about it. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet unease began to grow. The first real moment of fear came one morning when I was brushing my teeth. I looked up into the mirror, and for a second I didn't recognize my own reflection. My eyes looked distant, my face strangely unfamiliar, as if I were looking at someone I used to know. The toothbrush fell from my hand, and I stood there, gripping the edge of the sink, trying to remember what I was supposed to do next. When I told Ethan, he tried to stay calm. "Maybe it's stress," he said softly. "You've been working too hard again." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe anything that didn't sound like something's wrong. But it kept happening. Words slipping from my memory mid-sentence, tremors in my fingers that made it hard to hold my camera steady. And the light that used to guide my photographs, that warm golden glow I'd built my art around, started to fade. My images turned pale, colorless, like they were mirroring something inside me I couldn't fix. Ethan noticed before I said anything more. He'd watch me closely, his eyes carrying that heavy kind of worry he never said out loud. "Hey," he'd whisper, reaching for my hand. "You still here with me?" And I'd nod, even when I wasn't sure anymore. The diagnosis came after a blur of hospital visits, blood tests, and scans that felt like someone cataloging my decline. Degenerative neurological disorder, slow, irreversible, and merciless. The doctor's voice was calm, rehearsed. I remember staring at a painting on the wall, a sunset, and thinking how cruel it was that something so beautiful could fade too. When I told Ethan, I tried to make it sound smaller than it was. "I'll be fine," I said. "I'll manage." He didn't answer. He just took my face in his hands and pressed his forehead against mine, whispering, "You don't have to be fine alone." After that, something shifted in us. He became gentler, overly careful with me, like I was made of glass. And I hated it. I wanted him to look at me like he used to, not as someone breaking but as the woman he loved. One night I shouted, "Stop treating me like I'm disappearing." And he shouted back, "Because you are." That silence after, it broke something between us. He turned away, breathing hard, and I saw tears glinting in his eyes. "I don't know how to love you when I'm scared of losing you," he said. Neither of us spoke after that for a long time. But later that night, when I couldn't sleep, I felt him slip his arm around me, his breath steady against my back. And I realized he was already grieving me even while I was still here. I started to fade, from my work, from my friends, from myself. But Ethan stayed. Through every doctor visit, every trembling hand, every forgotten word. He became my strength when I couldn't find my own. And yet, I could see the cost in his eyes, the exhaustion, the helplessness, the quiet fear that never left him. I was losing myself. But he was losing us. And that was the cruelest part. Love didn't leave when I began to fade. It just stayed, trapped between what was and what might never be again. Ethan stopped talking as much after the diagnosis. Not out of anger, but something quieter, heavier. The kind of silence that hums beneath the surface, full of things he doesn't know how to say. At first, I tried to fill the space with my usual chatter. Stories about our favorite cafe, memories of trips we'd taken, little reminders of normal life. But my words started to feel like pebbles dropped into a bottomless well. He'd just nod, half smile, and say, "Yeah, I remember." One night, I found him sitting alone in the dark living room. The TV was on, muted, playing some old news broadcast. His hands were clasped tightly, his knuckles pale. "Hey," I whispered, walking over. "You should sleep." He looked up, and for the first time in weeks I saw his eyes, really saw them. They looked like they belonged to someone who'd aged years overnight. "I can't," he said finally. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and you'll forget who I am." I sat down beside him, took his hand. It felt tense, cold. "I'm still me," I whispered. "I'm still right here." But even as I said it, something inside me knew it wasn't completely true. Pieces of me were slipping away. Names, places, moments, like old photographs left out in the rain. Over time, Ethan changed. He became quieter, more methodical. He cooked, cleaned, made lists for my medication schedules. He didn't laugh as much. He didn't go out with friends. It was as if his entire world had condensed into a single purpose, keeping me together. And it broke my heart to watch him forget how to live for himself. Once I overheard him on the phone with his sister. "She's getting worse," he said, his voice cracking. "And I can't stop it." There was a pause. Then he added, "I don't know who I'm becoming." That night, I found him sitting by my bedside, reading one of my old journals. I didn't stop him. I just watched his lips move as he silently read words I'd written years before. Dreams, jokes, half-finished poems. When he noticed me watching, he smiled weakly. "You used to write like the world was on fire," he said softly. "It still is," I whispered. "You just can't see the flames anymore." He reached for me then, his hand trembling slightly. "I'm scared of who I'll be without you," he said. That was the moment I realized. His silence wasn't distance. It was survival. He wasn't pulling away from me. He was retreating into himself because it hurt too much to keep reaching out and feeling me fade. Some days I'd catch him staring at me like he was memorizing my face. Other days he'd talk to me like I was already gone. Asking questions I couldn't answer, telling me stories from our life as if reminding me might bring me back. He never raised his voice again. Never blamed me. But I could see the war inside him, the fight between love and despair. Once, when I woke up from a dizzy spell, he was sitting beside me, his head in his hands. I touched his shoulder and whispered, "You don't have to save me." He lifted his head slowly, eyes red, voice hoarse. "I know," he said, "but I don't know how to stop trying." His silence grew heavier in the weeks that followed. Not empty, but full of everything he couldn't say aloud. Every breath he took beside me was a quiet promise. "I'm still here." And even as I drifted further away, even as the light around us dimmed, I could still feel it, that steady heartbeat beside mine, fighting for something already half lost. He was unraveling, yes, but he never let go. And sometimes love sounds exactly like that, not words, not grand gestures. Just the quiet persistence of someone who refuses to walk away. even when staying means breaking a little more each day. The morning everything changed was gray, the kind of gray that feels heavy like the sky knows something you don't. Ethan had gone to refill my prescription while I stayed home, sitting by the window with a blanket around my shoulders. My mind drifted in and out like static on a weak signal. I remember staring at the photograph on the wall, us at the lake, his arms around me, both of us laughing. For a moment I couldn't remember where it was taken, or why we were laughing at all. When Ethan came back, he looked different. His jaw was tight, his voice sharper than I'd heard in months. "They didn't have your meds," he said. "They said the order was delayed again." Then quieter. "That's the third time this month." He tried to hide it, but I could see the worry behind his anger. Later that evening, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him on the phone, whispering frustrated. "No, that's not acceptable. You told me she'd have enough to keep her stable." A pause. "I don't care about policy, I care about her." Something about the way he said it, that edge of desperation, made me sit up. When he hung up, I asked softly, "What's happening, Ethan?" He looked at me, and I could see he was deciding whether to tell me the truth. Finally, he sat down beside me and said, "Your medication. It's been tampered with." I blinked. "What do you mean?" He rubbed a hand over his face. "Some of the pills weren't the same as the ones prescribed. I noticed last week. I thought it was a manufacturing issue, but now I think someone's been switching them." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Who would do that?" He hesitated. "Your doctor. Or someone in his office." I went through the pharmacy records. Some of the shipments were marked as fulfilled. "But you never received them." He looked at me, voice trembling. "They've been cutting corners, using cheaper substitutes untested. You've been getting worse because of it." For a long time I couldn't speak. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rage. But all that came out was a whisper. "So it wasn't just the disease." Ethan shook his head. "No. And I'm going to make it right." The days that followed blurred together. Phone calls, paperwork, confrontations. Ethan was relentless. He stayed up nights researching, documenting, collecting every piece of evidence he could find. I watched him transform. Not the quiet, gentle man who used to write love notes on napkins, but someone fiercer, harder. He was still fighting for me, but now it wasn't against fate. It was against people. He confronted my doctor. I wasn't there, but I heard later from the nurse that Ethan slammed a folder full of proof on the desk and said, "You took something from her that you can't replace." The doctor denied it, of course. But Ethan didn't stop. He filed complaints, reached out to advocacy groups, even the media. He turned his pain into purpose, and for a while it felt like maybe justice could heal something inside him. But every battle came with a cost. He slept less, ate less, smiled almost never. His hands shook sometimes, not from fear but from exhaustion. One night I tried to pull him back to bed to make him rest. "Please, Ethan," I whispered. "I need you to stay with me, not lose yourself in this." He looked at me, tired, hollow-eyed but burning with love. "I can't stop," he said, "because they already took enough from us." In the end, he won the case. The investigation confirmed everything. Falsified prescriptions, financial fraud, negligence. There were apologies, settlements, promises. But none of it gave me back what was lost. My health didn't return. My memory continued to unravel. And Ethan, he had changed. His voice was rougher, his touch a little slower. The light that once danced in his eyes was dimmer now, replaced by something colder, like a man who's seen too much. I remember sitting with him one night, my head on his shoulder, and saying quietly, "You saved me." He paused, then whispered, "I tried." That's when I realized what love had become for us. Not just joy, not even hope. It was defiance. A promise to stand in the ruins and still hold hands, no matter how much had been taken. By the time the dust settled, Ethan wasn't the same man I had fallen in love with on that golden spring afternoon. The gentle warmth he once carried, the easy laugh, the patient voice, it had hardened into something colder, steadier. His love for me was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer soft. It was armor. He started waking up before dawn, sitting by the kitchen table with his laptop open and stacks of paper surrounding him. Not bills. Not work. Research. Medical journals, experimental treatments, neurologists halfway across the country. He'd write to all of them, begging, bargaining, demanding answers. Sometimes I'd watch him from the doorway. His hair messy, eyes red, hands trembling from too much coffee and too little sleep. I'd whisper, "Come back to bed, please." He'd glance at me, his face softening for a moment and say, "Just one more hour." But those hours turned into nights, and those nights turned into months. He'd changed his job schedule too. Switched to night shifts so he could be home during my worst hours when confusion or pain would wake me. He'd hold me when I panicked, when I forgot where I was, when I cried because I couldn't remember his name for a heartbeat. And he'd whisper it over and over until it felt like a song. "I'm Ethan. I'm right here. You're safe." He was breaking in silence piece by piece, but he never let it show. Until one morning, I found him sitting on the floor by the bathroom sink. His uniform still on, his hands covered in dried blood. Not his, I later learned. Call gone wrong. Patient who didn't make it. When he saw me, he tried to smile, but his voice cracked. "I couldn't save him," he whispered. And for the first time in months, he cried. I sat with him on the cold tile floor and held him like he'd held me 100 times. "You don't have to save everyone," I said softly. He looked up, tears shining. "But I couldn't save you either." Something inside me broke at that. Because I realized what loving me had done to him. It had made him stronger, yes, but also lonelier. He'd built himself into a man made of resolve, of fire and purpose, but he'd lost the softness that once made him light up a room. And yet I couldn't stop loving him for it. Because every scar, every sleepless night, every piece of himself he gave away, it was for me. He started documenting everything: photos, recordings, journal entries about my symptoms, my laughter, my bad days, my better days. One night I asked why. He said, "Because I want to remember who we were when the world starts to forget." That sentence stayed with me. When the world starts to forget. He said it as if forgetting was inevitable. As if he'd already accepted that someday, the traces of us would fade like old film. But there were moments when the old Ethan would still surface. Once we drove to the lake, the same spot from our photo on the wall. The air was crisp, the water still. He helped me out of the car, and for a while we just stood there in silence. Then he whispered, "You once said this place felt like forever." I smiled faintly. Maybe forever's shorter than we thought. He looked at me, eyes glassy but full of love. "Then I'll take every second of it." That's who he'd become. A man who traded comfort for devotion, ease for endurance. He wasn't the boy who fell in love with me in a coffee shop. He was something more. Something forged by love and loss, faith and fury. Sometimes when I watched him sleep, I'd trace my fingers along the small scar above his brow, the one he got from running into a door the night he rushed to get my medication. He laughed about it then. He doesn't laugh much now. But in his silence, in his quiet strength, I found something sacred. He was living proof that love doesn't just survive pain. It evolves through it. And maybe that's what love really is. Not about how it begins, but about who it turns us into when we refuse to let go. That was the man he became. And even as my world blurred and my memories thinned, one truth remained crystal clear. I was loved by someone who would rather shatter than stop trying to hold me together. The house feels quieter now. Not the kind of quiet that comforts, the kind that lingers, heavy and full of ghosts. Sometimes I hear the echo of Ethan's footsteps in the hallway, or the soft clink of his coffee mug in the sink, and for a moment it feels like time forgot to move forward. Then the silence returns, reminding me that it always does. It's been months since the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do. The disease had reached its final stages: memory fractures, muscle loss, confusion. I don't remember the last day I took a photo, or the last time I felt the camera's weight in my hands. But I do remember Ethan's voice, steady, unshaken, telling me he would be there until the end. And he was. He became my world's narrator. Every morning he'd sit beside me, reading from the journals he'd written. Our story, our memories. His words were the thread holding me together. "Remember when we got lost driving to the coast?" he'd ask. And I'd smile, even if I couldn't recall the place. He'd continue anyway. "We found that tiny diner with the neon lights and bad coffee. You said it felt like the middle of nowhere, and I said anywhere with you felt like somewhere." He always told it like that, not just reminding me of the past but painting it back into color. But love, no matter how fierce, can't stop time. My body grew weaker. The tremors worse. And Ethan began to fade in another way. His eyes hollow, his smile worn thin, like he'd given every ounce of himself just to keep me here a little longer. One night, when the rain whispered against the windows, I woke to find him sitting beside the bed, his hand in mine, his head bowed. I could barely speak, my voice just a breath. "Ethan," I whispered. "You look so tired." He looked up, eyes glistening. "I'm fine," he lied softly. I smiled weakly. "You've been saying that for years." He let out a small laugh, the kind that sounded more like a sob. Then he kissed my forehead and whispered, "You were my reason." There was nothing else to say after that. We just sat in silence, breathing the same quiet air, surrounded by all the things we'd built together. The photographs, the notes, the pieces of a love that had outlasted almost everything. In the following days, my world began to blur completely. Faces, voices, even my own reflection became unfamiliar. But somewhere in the haze, I always knew when Ethan was near. I could feel it, that stillness that only existed when he was in the room. That warmth that didn't belong to the world, only to him. The last clear moment I remember was sunlight breaking through the blinds. Ethan was holding my hand, tracing soft circles on my palm. I turned my head toward him and said, barely a whisper, "Promise me you'll keep living." He nodded, eyes full of tears. "How?" "Find light again," I said. "Even if it's without me." I think I smiled after that. I hope I did. Because that was the last thing I ever wanted him to remember. Not my pain, not my fading, but my smile. He told me later, though I didn't hear it, that after I was gone, he drove to the lake one last time. He sat by the water until the stars came out and whispered into the wind. I remember. He scattered the photographs we took there. The ones we'd framed, the ones he couldn't bear to keep. They floated for a moment, then sank beneath the surface, like tiny pieces of our love dissolving into the world. He still visits, I think. The neighbors say they see him sometimes at the cafe on 5th Street, sitting by the window, staring at an empty chair across from him. Always the same order, black coffee and a small potted plant by the window. He never says much. Just listens to the hum of the world, as if he's waiting to hear my laugh again. And maybe in some small way he does. Because love, the real kind, doesn't end when the body does. It lingers. In the corners of rooms, in half-remembered melodies, in photographs that outlive the people in them. Love hurts because it stays. Because it keeps breathing long after we stop. So if he still feels the ache, I hope he knows it's beautiful. Because where love hurts, it also remembers. And somewhere, in the space between pain and peace, that's where I'll always be waiting.